Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to run through things pretty quickly this morning because we have a lot to cover and not very much time. So first, a couple of housekeeping things. I have pulled up here the Lincoln University final exam schedule. According to this, which let's just double check, it says effective January 12th, 2026. We have our final exam in here between at 8 a.m. on Monday from 8 to 10. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with your midterm. It's going to be released for you to complete online. I'm going to give you through like probably Wednesday night to get that done, maybe Thursday morning. I'm going to see how much grading I have to do still. It's going to depend on how many papers I have left because all my work needs to be in like Friday afternoon. If you want to come to class, this goes for people who are in person and who are at home. We will watch the documentary The Social Dilemma in class, and I will give you a one-letter grade bump on your exam score. So if you get a B on your final, you get an A on your final. If you get a C on your final, you get a B on your final. That'll be for the people who come and watch the documentary. I love showing this to this class. We just seem to have not had that much time in here because a lot of people don't believe that what's happening in it is super real. They'll tell me, sure, Andrew, that's an interesting story, but this would never happen in real life. As you are looking through it, it seems far-fetched, but believe me, everything in there is true. We've spoken here, I think, a little bit about Pizzagate, yes? Does anybody know what I'm talking about with Pizzagate?
We haven't spoken about it, but I know kind of what it is.
Oh, wow. Okay, I missed it. So in the documentary, when we watch it, it kind of tells a story about a kid who gets roped into going to a protest and getting in trouble, even though it's not really what he grew up believing. It's maybe not even what he believes. And I have students tell me all the time, Andrew, that could never happen. There was, during Donald Trump's first time running for president, this thing called Pizzagate. And what it was is that there's an ultra-conservative kind of conspiracy theorist group called QAnon. They had the QAnon shaman. It was this crazy guy that wore like a beaver skin hat and painted his face to look like an American flag and stuff. And one of their biggest conspiracy theories is that the elites in the country were kidnapping, molesting, and then extracting the blood from children because this was the secret to life. Like this would provide them with eternal life. And all this was happening underneath a pizza restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C. So this guy came armed to the teeth, ready to free all the children. Only it turns out that the said pizza restaurant doesn't even have a basement. So not a real thing. But the thing about it is there's all kinds of stories from people who kind of went down the rabbit hole into these conspiracy theories and started believing something that later on they regretted just because media forced them to do so. So when you're watching the documentary Monday, keep that in mind. We will start promptly at 8 because I believe it's just a little bit over an hour and I want to make sure and get it all in. So if you come in late, no problem. We'll have a sign-in sheet to give everybody credit. Any questions about the end of the semester before we dive into today's material?
So a whole letter grade bump?
Yes, a whole letter grade bump, which equates to 10 points. But the way I've weighted things, it's a whole letter grade bump. Shoot.
Okay, I had a question about this. Like, I know that you said that it turned out to be like false and no basement, but like I heard some like there was like a online thing, like pizza place online. Like you could buy pizza, like a cream soda. Like people like do that. I don't know if that was like another conspiracy.
What would you get if you bought the soda?
You'd get kids.
You'd get a kid? I mean,
and it was in like the Epstein files too.
So that one in particular, oh my gosh, this is such a funny story because Epstein was emailing Elon Musk and was like, hey man, you want to come party? I've got lots of good pizza and grape soda or something like that, trying to be like sly. And Elon Musk is like, I don't have time for pizza. I only want to do the hard stuff. And Epstein's like, we don't have any hard stuff here, just pizza and grape soda. So yeah, that is a thing. We don't really know what that meant. But yeah, it was something perverted. That and there are all kinds of different things that criminals use to hide what they're doing. And so every conspiracy theory, in my opinion, has a little grain of truth. It may be logically impossible for this to occur, like the pizza restaurant that doesn't have a basement. But you never know what people are doing. People never cease to amaze me at what they're trying to get done.
I think it's more like a half-truth. Like, I'm pretty sure that there were pedophile rings that used that language, but saying it was this specific restaurant that doesn't even have a basement is kind of like, they're like halfway there, but then they are also QAnon people, so they're like also completely way off in some respects. It's like,
yeah, regarding Pizzagate in particular, I'm not sure that anybody, I don't believe that Hillary Clinton is drinking the blood of children to stay ever young. Mostly because if she was, she'd look a lot younger than she looks.
if it really unlocked immortality, they wouldn't all look like they're like shriveling into grapes.
125.
They all look like they're dying. They wouldn't have like weird makeup splotches all over and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's jump into the material for today. We can talk more about this after the course, but I've got to get through this material just so that you guys have it. Last housekeeping thing. The final exam will be the same format as the midterm. All right, so today we're going to kind of cover everything we haven't yet. So we're going to identify the main tools of foreign policy, explain when and why each tool is used. We're just going to jump into this is the final lecture for the class. Today is about putting everything together. There's not going to be any new complicated formats. We're just going to be applying what we have already learned. You now have all the pieces. Today's about seeing how they fit together when the United States makes decisions in the real world. So let's jump in with the tools of foreign policy. They have basically four main tools. They have three buckets. The first bucket is diplomacy, and it has four main tools: negotiation, alliances, treaties, and communication. All of these should make pretty good sense to you. If we talk about negotiation, for example, that's, hey, we will agree to do this if you agree to do that. It's not going to be the same thing as a treaty. It's not going to be formalized, but it's going to be something that we agree to do together without the formality of a treaty. I'm going to then go into treaties, which this is a formal document that solidifies a particular agreement. If we agree, for example, with Mexico and Canada in something we might call, I don't know, NATO, that we're going to keep duties and tariffs and everything low to facilitate trade among the North American Trade Organization partners, that would be something we do in a treaty. It's almost like a contract, but it's a contract between nations. An alliance is a step above that. An alliance is like a treaty, but on steroids. Because typically with an alliance, we have the treaty as the basis for it. We have that contract, but we also then go a step further and we have different agreements like, hey, if you are in a war, then I'm in a war too. If somebody invades you, then we'll come to your defense. I like thinking of it as the song, You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story. If Great Britain is our ally, as they are, then boy, if you've got problems, then I've got them too. That's the way alliances typically work. Again, A treaty is typically the basis of it, but it's elevated to the next level. And then finally, there's communication. Even if we're not going to have something formal or we're not going to negotiate something, the United States can typically communicate with our partners and adversaries to tell them, hey, no, don't do that. For example, if Russia is getting ready to do something that we don't like, the president could call up the prime minister of Russia, or I guess president of Russia, and be like, hey, Vladimir, we would really appreciate it if you didn't do that. That's not negotiation, that's just please don't. But these are going to be the diplomatic channels we can use. Military force. We can use military force as a deterrent, a direct conflict, or a showing of strength. The United States has one of the biggest militaries in the world. Our military spending, I think, outpaces the next 10 countries combined. We definitely have that show of force going on. This gets to Teddy Roosevelt's idea of speak softly and carry a big stick. His idea was that we didn't really need to go bomb people or anything like that. We could just have the biggest military in the world and say things like, hey, would it be cool, Philippines, if you just kind of like didn't do this? By the way, we've got 45 warships parked off your coast. Famously, if you remember back to your high school history classes, this is when we had the White Fleet. It's when the American Navy really took its leading place in the world. Something interesting to talk about with military force is that because of the size of the world and because of the superpower that the United States has become, we do a lot of our fighting through vassal states. And vassal states are going to be organizations like Israel or something that we're going to support in their military action. So it's not the United States directly doing X, but it's some really close ally of the United States doing X.
So it's basically us.
It's basically us. But on the political scene, we can say, oh no, we didn't go after you. It was this country. It's interesting because now that's kind of falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have economic tools. These are going to be trade agreements like NATO, sanctions like what we have on Russia, aid, like we give Ukraine aid, and then tariffs. Tariffs are a massive thing, as we have seen now. And just to be 100% clear, once again, so you guys know what a tariff is, when the United States imports something, when we bring something into our country, like an iPhone, that iPhone costs a certain amount to buy from whoever it's made from overseas. It then gets shipped on usually like a container ship. Maybe it's flown in on a plane. Maybe it comes in on a truck. But at its point of entry, whoever is importing it has to pay a percentage of its value to the United States government. Not the person bringing it in, but the person receiving it. Apple uses A1 as its shipping partner. So A1 will load up a container ship with iPhones and then sail it across the Pacific Ocean typically. And when that container ship docks and those containers are unloaded onto the pier, the United States Customs wants their paycheck. And that paycheck is not going to be paid by A1, it's going to be paid by Apple. Well, here's the key part of this. Apple's not going to take a hit for the cost of rising tariffs. They're not going to say, oh, this sucks. Wow, wow. Looks like we're going to make less money. No, they're just going to pass that cost onto you as the consumer. So when you hear that tariffs are basically eliminating taxes and things like this, don't believe it. That's not the way tariffs work. Be afraid.
Is that why Nintendo games now cost like $70 instead of $50?
That greed and inflation. You know, there's lots of things that go into it. Each tool has strengths and limits. Foreign policy tools are like policy tools anywhere else. Each one solves some problems and creates others. How do we choose among the various tools, there's a couple of factors to keep in mind. First, urgency. How fast must we act? Second, what's the cost of this particular tool? I've been watching too much Mickey Mouse Clubhouse with my kids. I almost said toodles. What's the financial, political, or human cost? So for example, rising tariffs are going to necessarily cause people to want to buy American more. If we can make the cost of the foreign good more expensive, so for example, if we have an iPhone that's built overseas and it costs 20% more than an iPhone built here, you're gonna wanna buy the iPhone built here. That makes sense. However, what are the trade-offs with that? I don't think it works in the long run because everybody will try and figure out some way to work around it. Second, fourth, likelihood of success. 5, domestic political constraints, and then 6, international responses. With tariffs, for example, when we said, hey, China, we don't want to buy our stuff from you anymore, we're going to slap you with a whole bunch of tariffs. China said, okay, don't threaten us with a good time. And they turned around and raised the tariffs on lots of American agricultural imports. A lot of the grain we produce in our country goes overseas and is sold in China. And so now if all of a sudden China has levied equal tariffs on our grain, it makes that grain less desirable to Chinese markets. If that happens, then that grain's value in the United States goes down. It hurts farmers. So there's always lots of trade-offs. It's always kind of a balancing act. And there's usually going to be a response. There's no correct tool for any one thing. There's only trade-offs that we get. Foreign policy decisions are about picking the least bad option under pressure. So we're going to probably skip this. All right, so who shapes foreign policy? We're going to explicitly connect everything together now. So here are the major things that are going to shape foreign policy. With Congress, we have funding, oversight, and constraints. We talked about that a little bit last time. The president has agenda setting, speed, and unilateral action. The bureaucracy has the expertise, the implementation, and the intelligence, and the courts have a limited role, and they have occasional constitutional questions that come up. Interest groups have advocacy, apply pressure, and frame the issues. And then public opinion is expressed through the elections and political incentives. Foreign policy is not one actor, it's a system. Every institution we studied shows up in foreign policy so far. All right, any questions about foreign policy before I make sure that we've covered everything else for the textbook?
When should I schedule it for?
No one's talking to you, Siri. Nope, okay. So we're gonna do a quick outline on state and local government. This is an important thing to understand because we have federalism, we have that layer cake of the way everything works. The big idea is that state and local governments are where much of American policy is actually experienced, and they operate under the same principles of federalism, institutions, incentives, and trade-offs, but with different constraints and closer connections to citizens. Skipping this. So we've kind of covered chunks of this over the course of the class, but states are not just smaller versions of the national government. They have shared powers. They have their own constitutions, typically, their own laws, their own policy and authorities. And then many policy areas are primarily state-driven. States have the responsibility typically for things like education, public safety, which is police, prisons, election administration, transportation, health programs, kind of shared with the federal government, and business regulation. States typically have a governor that serves as the executive branch, the legislature, which is typically bicameral, although some states have a single chamber legislature, and then a state court of some sort. Here we have a Supreme Court. If you went to the judge who presented last week, she got a lot of things right. One thing that's weird about Missouri is we don't actually have the Court of Appeal, or we don't actually have the Supreme Court as an appellate court to the appellate court. The Supreme Court is going to vacate and set aside the Court of Appeals decision, so they erase it and it's as though it never happened. Compared to the federal system, states are often more fragmented, sometimes weaker executive power, and there's more variation across the states. State constitutions are often longer and more detailed than the US Constitution. They are easier to amend and they include more policy specifics. Missouri's Bill of Rights, for example, is significantly longer than the US Constitution's. Most of them don't really matter all that much. Some things we say are coextensive with the federal Constitution. So for example, the prohibition against illegal searches and seizures, because the same language is used, Missouri just adopts whatever the feds say. But a big reason for that is because Missouri's Constitution is a lot newer than the United States Constitution. The Missouri Constitution was written in, I think, the 1940s. And so it's necessarily going to apply what we have learned after having operated under the United States Constitution for 100 years. States are major policy actors, not just administrative units. So what are local governments? There are several different types of local governments. There's counties. Typically a county would have been run, that's the one step down from the state. Then we have cities and municipalities. These are going to be cities like Jefferson City or towns within a smaller area. The classification typically depends on the size, how many people actually live there. We have school districts that could operate within a city, could operate within a county, and then we have special districts. So if you go to Kansas City, for example, there's a special development district along the light rail line, and the taxes for all the businesses in that area have gone up slightly to cover the cost of operating the light rail system. Then as a user, it's free for you to encourage you to frequent those businesses. So what do local governments do? They're going to be responsible for police and fire services, schools, zoning and land use, infrastructure like roads and utilities, and parks and public services. They typically have a mayor in city council or a council manager system or some sort of a variation on that. In Missouri, we kind of have different ways that that's organized. We can talk about that if you want to take the state and local government class. But it's not one size fits all. It's not like where in the federal system, we have one way that it's run. In the state system, we have one major way it's run with slight deviation. There can be massive deviation among different cities. Among different counties, it's typically one thing. You usually have a county council, and then sometimes a county administrator. But again, slight variation there. How do the cities and counties relate to the state? Local governments are created by the state. So for Jefferson City to exist, Jefferson City had to be recognized by the state of Missouri. States define the powers that local governments are going to have, and there's going to be variation depending on state law, home rule versus limited authority, things like that. Again, something we can go into detail about if you want to take the state and local government class later on. The key takeaway is that local government is where policy becomes immediate and visible. Finally, policy variation and inequality. Why policy differs across places and why that matters. So there's going to be policy variation across states. Each state can have different tax rates, different educational funding levels, different social policies, and different regulations. Why does this variation exist? Federalism allows flexibility. If you think back to when we talked about federalism to begin with, this is something we like. We like places to experiment with how they're going to provide different things. If we take Missouri, for example, we kind of, I think, are middle of the road related to education. If we go somewhere like Massachusetts, they dump tons of money into education. Who has the better outcome? We'll know after longitudinal studies, but we can kind of hazard guesses to see what's working, what's not. Second, there's political culture differences between states. Next, economic conditions differ. And then finally, interest groups differ as well. So what's the benefit of the variation? Well, we talked about that experimentation. Each state is a mini laboratory. Second, states can be responsive to the local needs. And then finally, we can have innovation. We don't have to wait for something to percolate through all the states. We don't have to change the Constitution. We can change the way we're running something pretty quickly at the state level. What's the cost of variation, though? Well, this is going to be inequality across states. If you want certain services, you can go to Illinois, and they're pretty easy to obtain. If you need it here, a lot harder. We talked about that. There's unequal access to services. And then finally, there's confusion and inconsistency. Lots of times I'll have somebody say, well, I learned how to drive in Illinois, and this isn't a problem there. Well, it is here, and you're driving on Missouri roads, so you've got to kind of follow that rule. A quick note on the income tax thing. If Missouri gets rid of income taxes, for example, a lot of St. Louis people will probably go to Illinois to buy their food and groceries because the sales taxes will go up. Illinois will still have income tax. And so if they want to be able to get things at a lower cost, they can simply go across the road or go across the Eads Bridge and get them at a lower cost. So there's also going to be local inequality. There's wealth differences across cities and counties, funding disparities, especially within school districts, and uneven service quality. The key takeaway here is where you live in the United States can significantly shape your opportunity and outcomes. We're going to skip the structured activity. Skip that. All right, that's it for the class. Does anybody have any questions? All right, hearing none, remember Monday, 8 a.m., I'll send out an announcement on Canvas just so everybody knows. It'll be extra credit up to a letter grade on your final exam. Any other questions before I end this? Sweet.